Looking for real stories that lift you up? Welcome to Inspire and Impact, the podcast where purpose meets perseverance. This is where transformation begins and your story continues.
Welcome to Inspire Impact. I'm Daniel Rosenstein, the host of the show. Today I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Albert Bramante. Albert, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. It's an honor.
Likewise, I'm very excited to talk with you. Can you share a little bit about yourself, your background with the audience?
Sure. So I have a PhD in psychology. In addition to working as a psychology professor, I represent actors. I'm a talent agent in New York. So I represent actors professionally for film, TV, theater, commercial, print, voiceover. So in a sense, I serve as a deployment agent for professional full-time actors. And I've also been doing that for about 20 years or so. And I've placed actors on Law and Order, FBI, Blue Bloods. I've also placed clients on Broadway, off-Broadway tours, as well as the host of commercials and print campaigns. So that's been my experience. And with my background in psychology, I'm able to kind of intersect the two of them together. Because one of the things that's really important to thrive and succeed as a performing artist is your mindset.
Absolutely. I mean, do you have a background in either theater or acting as well?
I did a little bit of acting, and I took some classes in acting in college, my undergraduate years. I consider when I work with actors or coach actors, I work on the mindset portion of it. I leave the technical side of acting, the performance side, the mechanics of acting to wonderful coaches and trainers that are out there. That's not what I do. So when people are looking for, let's say, acting training, that's not my area of expertise. So I would then refer, and I do have a Rolodex of different studios and different coaches in the New York area that are brilliant at what they do. And that's important too as an actor. But I started off as an actor myself when, I was first getting into the business. And that's what kind of intersected both worlds, because I was always into psychology. I was a receiving a master's at this point before I even dabbled in the performing arts. And what I realized was I enjoyed being around actors more than I enjoyed being around anyone else. For some reason, I just really felt at home amongst performance types, performing artists in general. That kind of led me down the path of how can I work? How can I support actors and still, kind of remain visible and relevant in the industry? And I did some work in casting before I became an agent, where I worked on some short films casting, some indie film casting. And I enjoyed the process because I really felt it was like putting pieces together a puzzle. And even as an agent, working and trying to fulfill a need of connecting people to the right projects or to the right roles is a puzzle. It's exciting for me.
That does sound very exciting, like a very interesting job. I mean, what inspired you to integrate your psychology background with the talent agency? I mean, because that's an interesting mix. We've talked to one or two other talent agencies, and I haven't heard them do that.
Yeah, for me, I feel like it's a great blend, and it helps me understand actors a little bit more. Some of my fellow agents may find some actor quirks a bit off-putting or unsettling. Whereas for me, I understand what's happening. And I think that's what adds to greater, understanding, is just a greater knowledge of what I'm going through and is, understanding what they're going. So my training helps me to bridge the gap of what's actually happening and really what's the true motivation behind it. And then it helps me able to work with that actor and understand them a little bit more.
Has there been any defining moment as a talent agent that kind of shaped how, coach the actors?
I would say defining moment is just for me being able to select the right actor for the right role, and then actually them booking is like a real And landing that role is really a sense of achievement for me and sense of fulfillment. But also, the one thing that also defines this type of work is while it is important for me to place the right actor in the right role, it's up to the actor then to drive it home in a sense. So they have to do well in the audition and land the role. That is out of my control. But that's when I can even guide them in a sense of, okay, even if it's mental preparation for that role, for the audition, or even help them connect to the character a little bit more can help. And sometimes that's that assisted me in helping other actors land roles because, sometimes my insight into the character.
Now, you also practice these modalities like hypnosis and NLP. What decided you to learn those modalities?
I was training to be a clinical psychologist. That was my ultimate goal when I first started studying psychology. I was going to be a clinical research psychologist as well as a practicing psychologist. But to be completely honest with you, I became a little disillusioned with the field. And the reason is that most clinical psychologists, and they do a lot of great work, so I don't want to downplay that. But a lot of clinical psychologists focus on what's wrong with people. And they focus on pathologizing people and putting labels on people and diagnostic categories on people, which can be important in getting the person the help that they need. But it can also be stigmatizing to them. And focusing again on the negative, which is what a lot of clinical psychologists do. When I was in grad school, I was hearing a lot of my professors who were experts in their field, and no doubt, probably brilliant psychologists, but they were telling classes about cases they were working on for, 9-10 years that they were in therapy with this, intensive therapy with this client, this patient, who wasn't really getting any better. And things in my brain were not adding up. I'm like, I would hope that there would be some progress within that. So I then became more interested in hypnosis and NLP. I was actually reading an article in Psychology Today to learn hypnosis. So yeah, I took my first introduction was I took a video course in it, and I became really enthralled by how faster it can be. And so I then went into, invest in some really, 3 to 6 month training certification programs. I did a couple of those, in person. And then I became also interested in NLP, which is like the power of language to influence neurology in the mind. And it uses a lot of principles of traditional psychotherapy, but it's much faster. It really helped get to the core of things. And I feel like even now most coaching models today integrate hypnosis and NLP, even though they may not do it directly or say or label what they're doing as hypnotic or NLP. But I feel like the processes are very similar. And that resonates more with the more rapid going and really sometimes just really clearing things up faster. Blocks, which could be blocks of performance, self-doubt, and all that. Because a lot of times we're running on programs that we grew up with, whether it's faulty things that our parents have said to us that we overgeneralized, traumas that we went through. But a lot of these things hold us back in life. And so I felt, hypnosis is a great tool to kind of rewire or reprogram a lot of things that we're going through.
So you've been in the industry now for a few decades. I'm sure it's evolved over the last time. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about that? Like how is the industry kind of evolved?
It's become much more accessible now than it used to be. When I first started, working in New York City, which is where I'm based out of, which is mainly known for theater, Broadway, of course, being a capital of the world. So New York was primarily a theater town when I first started. We had a couple of soaps and maybe 1 or 2 TV series, including Law and Order and Sopranos, but everything else was out in LA. So if you wanted to be an actor, so a screen actor, the route, you had to move to LA, or you had to uproot to LA at some point, because there was only a ceiling you could hit in New York. Now, what I've seen in the past, I would say 10, 15 years, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, all of the major streamers got into producing original content. And producing this original content is what created many more productions, especially in New York. So we went from maybe, a half dozen to like almost 10 times the amount, in the past, 10 years. So the amount of work has increased dramatically. And there's even a migration from LA actors to New York to work on TV in New York. So that's how it changed. Also, the internet and digital and web stuff and mobile stuff has increased. Like now you can really do movies on cell phone. With the latest smartphones have technology and iPhones, you can shoot movies for a fraction of the cost that you would go from a major studio. So now much more things are being made, and that means many more opportunities. And what's good about some of these opportunities, you don't necessarily have to be an A-list actor to lead a nice role in a film or a TV series anymore. So that's how it's changed. One of the ways it's changed. A second way it's changed is there's much more diversity now in the types of roles that actors are getting. So a lot of it is all ethnicities now and all types, all walks of life. And that's a change. It's not necessarily the leading man or woman anymore. It's all about telling authentic stories.
And do you work with all the studios, or do you only work with a particular studio?
No, I work with all types of studios. So I've worked, clients on Netflix, I had clients on NBC, CBS, ABC. So I had a lot of.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've had clients at all different studios and all that. Now, with COVID, things have changed even, differently since 2020. So most auditions or interviews for parts were done in studio. You went into a studio, you went to an office to audition. Now, most of the auditions are done at home, do it yourself, self-taping, that's what they call it. So an actor would either go to their own studio, another studio, or build their own studio at home and film on their cell phone or camera their own auditions, which made it a little bit more accessible, but also challenging because now actors really have to guide on their own intuition to film these auditions. Because in the past, when you went in for an audition for a casting director or producer, you would often get on the spot redirection or readjustments to a scene. How can you do this differently and things like that. With a self-tape, you're just guessing. So an actor really has to put on their hat, use their past training. So it's a little more challenging in that aspect because you don't know what they're looking for. And in this type of industry, what makes it kind of challenging is you don't really get any feedback. If you don't get the part, you just won't hear from them. So a lot of times these actors are sending in these self-tapes and not hearing anything. Now, the advantage from people like us, like agents, is now we can look at these tapes and look at what's going on here. In the past, we would just take the actor's word for it that the audition went well. And they would say, and we couldn't really understand why they weren't booking because we weren't in a room with them. Now we can kind of look at the self-tapes and say, maybe this is what you need to do differently. And this may not be working. Try this, try that method. So I would say definitely that has changed. And of course, even another massive change we're seeing is AI, which is starting to affect our industry to some level.
How?
Especially voiceovers, because now you have, software programs like 11 Labs and other types of voice cloning that you could really just have, have your content narrated by AI. You don't necessarily need
That's true. So
actors anymore.
Away from jobs that people used to do voiceovers for.
Yeah, it can be challenging because even when I was writing my book, I had a lot of companies that were emailing me like, when I have AI narrate your book, I'm like, no, I'd rather have a real person narrate my book. Because even though AI is increasing, you can still tell if something is AI generated, especially. I think it would be very easy to tell signs that even a voice is generated because it won't pick up the natural rhythm of a voice. But it's still changing because nowadays it's much cheaper to clone your voice. Because even myself now, I mean, if I wanted to, I could have myself narrate a book without really narrating the book, because I could just go into a software program like 11 Labs, 1 to 2 minutes, record my audio speaking, and now I'll just feed it text my book, and I'll have an audiobook summary of my book in my voice. Which is, I often say this type of stuff is both exciting and scary at the same time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, now that, been doing the coaching for a long time, we worked with hundreds, maybe, even over 1,000 actors, and you work with a coaching aspect of mindset. What are some of the biggest blocks you see that, actors or potential actors have in terms of being successful in the industry?
I would say, 3 major things: self-doubt, imposter syndrome, which is similarly related, and then burnout. Because the thing is, as an actor, when you first coming in, let's say a lot of actors move to New York or to LA, they're not really natively born there. They move from like the Midwest or from neighboring states. There's a lot of excitement in the beginning, but you just came out of training, you're young, and it's exciting to go into this field of acting. And maybe when you were in college, you were in every production because there was a smaller pool of candidates to choose from. But now you're moving into a major market where the competition is intense, because there's literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of actors in New York and LA vying to be in the spotlight. And there's only a limited number of roles. So getting told no a lot can add to burnout, can add to, can add to the self-doubt.
I mean, what do you think is like one of the biggest misconceptions like actors have when it comes to making it in the industry?
I think the biggest misconceptions is the overnight success story. Oh, they got their big break overnight. What you don't often hear is that overnight break took 15 years in the making. There was a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. They were hustling behind the scenes. So I think the biggest misconception is how quick it can be, or how quick. And it's a process. It's a marathon. It takes small steps. It's not a sprint. And, some of these actors, they think, which is great, but a lot of times their education or their coaches in their communities, small communities, like, oh, you'll be on Broadway, you have a voice for Broadway. And so now they think, okay, I'm moving to New York, I'm going to be on Broadway. And, some people in the first couple of years may actually do that, but it may take years to happen. And that can be incredibly frustrating. Especially if you have this passion to perform, and yet you're constantly being told no. And that can lead to burnout. So there's a high turnover rate in the industry. Like a lot of actors give up after a couple of years and they go thinking of, a more stable type of income, which on some aspect, I can't necessarily say I blame them, because it is a challenging industry. And I think they say only a few % of actors can really make a full-time living just off of acting. The other 98% have to get survival jobs, or other jobs to kind of sustain their income and sustain their lifestyle.
Wow, that's a pretty high, a number for people who are successful in the industry. So how can, I mean, now that you mentioned to us that a lot of actors deal with tremendous amount of rejection, I mean, how can they deal with that, like mentally, without, I mean, that must be really tough. Like you said, like you go on 10 auditions and 9 out of 10, they say no, because whatever reason, it's just not right.
Right. The important thing is your perspective. And so a lot of actors, because they're so passionate, because they're very often empaths, which they're very deeply they're very personal, they're very sensitive, which helps them, again, in their art, but it can also be challenging in life. So the important thing is to reframe the no's as not, first of all, not taking it personal. It's not personal. And that's where, like, I try to get the word rejection, or to get the word rejection out of the actor's vocabulary, because it's just simply your services are not needed today. So rather than looking at rejection as really personal, it's just that your services are not needed today. And if you can look at it that way, and in that framework, I think you'll find it a lot easier, in a sense, to work through.
So, like, in your point of view, how should actors perceive success? Because you said it's kind of like a unique industry where rejection is common.
So success is maybe different for each person, but one of the reasons people become an actor is they want to play different roles. They want to tell a different story. So one way that I would say defining success would be getting those opportunities. So let's reframe auditions as opportunities to perform, an opportunity to tell your story. You have 2 minutes to do what you love. Go in there and do what you love. And then don't, maybe not be so much attached to the outcome. And I've heard a lot of the most successful working actors out there, people that you may not necessarily know by name, but you see them by face because they've been on every, TV show. They had some parts in every movie. You'll often hear them say that they look at auditions as performances. They have that opportunity to perform for 2 minutes, and then when it's over, they let it go because it was, hey, I had my 2 minutes to perform. And so you can look at success as being able to do what you love. And then not being so much attached to the outcome. If I got the part, great. At least I got 2 minutes to perform. I got 2 minutes to do what I love to do.
So, I mean, how do you, since most actors don't get the part, then how do you recommend, what advice do you give to actors how they can sustain themselves financially? They obviously have to pay their bills, got to pay the rent, got to, get food and all the necessities in life.
Yeah, I mean, most actors, again, have survived jobs, so the one thing that's important is to have hobbies and passions that are outside of the industry. Some actors are educators. They like teaching. Or they work in real estate. They'll work as other types of coaches or maybe fitness trainers. So do something that makes them passionate, and therefore it'll be something that pays the bills while they're still doing what they love.
See, do you think that talent is more important or mindset's more important in terms of being successful in the industry?
It's a combination of both, because obviously you do need a talent to succeed, but it's also about developing the mindset, because you need to have grit or resilience through this. Because again, there's going to be a lot of the ratio of auditions to jobs is going to be much higher auditions compared to jobs that you're going to land. And so it's going to take time. So let's say one of the statistics that I've heard a lot of actors and people say is, so 1 in every 20 jobs that you apply for, submit your information to, you get an audition. And out of those auditions, every 20 auditions you book, you'll land. So you're talking almost like 200 jobs that you apply for before you land, for its booking. And that's considered average. So I think having that understanding of that education of that is important, to know exactly what it is you're going through and what it is you're dealing with and what you're up against here.
I mean, you talk a lot about self-sabotage. How does that typically show up with performers?
With performing, that could be not preparing fully for a role, being late to appointments, being late to set, not showing up for appointments, not being fully prepared, not blowing off performances, blowing off auditions because maybe you feel it doesn't necessarily resonate with you.
Is there any self-sabotage you think that they may not even be aware of what they're consciously aware of that they're doing, that you may see yourself?
Absolutely. The thing about self-sabotage, why it can be very sneaky, is we don't realize we're doing it. It's not so I self-sabotage today. We don't realize we're doing it. So what I often say is it either takes an external, like maybe a coach, to do that. Maybe it takes a trainer to do that, somebody who can really work with you to do with that, and just to kind of help with different things to work through in a sense. So maybe that is what you need. So that's maybe in the sense of what you might need, just someone to work through different things with you.
So why do you think so many people who are really talented in the industry have like fear of success or self-sabotage?
Why do I think fear of success and self-sabotage? The fear of success, and I think fear of success definitely drives self-sabotage. So fear of success is also something that we're not completely aware of. And, it even sounds absurd when you first hear about it, because someone would think, why would I fear the third thing I want? The reason is that's an unconscious fear. It's a subconscious fear. It's because of the change, the pressure that's going to be added onto you. Very oftentimes success requires change. It requires a lot more work. It requires a lot more responsibility. And it also may change relationships in your life. So a lot of times the people in your life, your friends, your family, may have the best intentions for you, but they also may be threatened by your success. And so there's that fear of losing those relationships too, and the fear of change. And also the pressure that can be added onto it. And all of these things add up. And the best way that our subconscious mind protects the fear is taking us out of danger. And that might mean taking us out of the opportunities for success.
So how can an actor tell if they're, self-sabotaging themselves? Is there any like clues or signs they can watch out for that there may be self-sabotage?
I would say signs, clues would be, are things constant, noticing patterns where you're always maybe late, running late. Maybe there's patterns where you're always feeling unprepared. Are you running into the same mistakes, the same cycles over and over again? That's when it's time to take a step back and see what's going on. And also sometimes even having more successful people in your life that can point out to you in a tough love manner, okay, these are things that you're doing.
Okay, cool. So what practical steps can someone take to break out of their self-sabotaging habits?
I would say, first of all, really develop habits of discipline. So putting things on a calendar, holding yourself to a schedule. That would be the first thing. And then, of course, if there's any fears that you're going to, work through them too. What is it that you really feel is holding you back? And reframing also the language that you use. Because a lot of times people will say in conversation or even to themselves, I'm a starving artist, or I'm a struggling artist, I'm a poor person, or I have bad luck. And the first thing that has to change is your vocabulary, your language. Because your words are incredibly, going back to the hypnosis, are incredibly hypnotic. So when you do these words, your language creates a reality. So if you say you're a struggling artist, if you say you're starving, if you say you're broke or unlucky, that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, you could also do the opposite, which is say how successful you are. And when you do that stuff, that's when you'll realize that you can reach your greatness. So watch the language you use, work through any fears you're dealing with, and keep a steady schedule, a consistent schedule.
So how does understanding like the different personality traits, like the big five, help actors or creatives grow?
Absolutely. The big five work together. And that's a group of psychologists narrowed down fundamental personality traits into 5 categories. So you've openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so think of the word ocean. as an acronym for that. So the first one is openness. Now, in order to be a creative person, you have to be open to new experiences. And that's just with anything. And even to learning, you have to be open to learning. And to be successful in any endeavor, you have to always have a mindset of, I'm always learning. And then conscientiousness refers to, discipline, work ethic. And very often with discipline, what you'll find is that a lot of people overestimate how disciplined they are. When that's an area of focus they really need to work on. So increasing that conscientiousness is important.
So
What's also important
sorry, go ahead.
is extroversion. Now, I'm not talking about being the life of the party, but you have to know how to connect with other people to be, especially a performer. So that's important. Agreeableness refers to how open, how you're able to listen, listening skills, and being able to implement. So you have to be coachable. And that's with any performance. You have to be extremely coachable. And so that's important, to be coachable. The next thing is neuroticism, and that refers to how easily reactive you are to stress. So people that are high in neuroticism are those that get stressed out easily, get anxiety very easily. And what we need to do is lower the levels of neuroticism. So what I found as far as these traits, how they interact, is a combination between high neuroticism and low conscientiousness. If you have those categories together, most likely you're going to self-sabotage. So what we want to do is develop the resilience and more of a grit mentality or strength so we can lower the level of neuroticism, but also develop habits of discipline so we increase conscientiousness. So I feel like those 5 really work together well.
So how can actors or anybody achieve like healthy self-esteem without the toxic positivity?
So healthy self-esteem and toxic positivity and toxic high self-esteem is really all about humility and being humble. And that's the big difference. So to be humble, but still believe that you are deserving and worthy and having a seat at the table of success, that's important. But you also at the same time know that you're learning and that you're not better than everybody else. And what I often see with that toxic positivity, number one, it's not realistic. And 2, a lot of times people don't like hearing any type of feedback or constructive criticism. But, sometimes actors they think that they have all the training in the world, that when you try to critique their work, they don't want to hear it. You're wrong or whatever it is.
Wow. So can you share maybe one powerful mindset shift that has helped your clients?
Yeah. Well, I would
be successful.
I would say again, the shift about rejection. There's no such thing as rejection. Just a simple reminder that your services are not needed today. And also look at failure and transform that into feedback and stepping stones for success. So anytime you have a failure, it's often a sign that something is great.
So what are your favorite tools or tips to help people overcome imposter syndrome?
The first thing is to take action. So put things on a calendar. To say you're going to do something someday is not realistic. Put it on a calendar because someday is not on the calendar. So put things in action, take action today. Even if it's a small thing, but just take action. Another thing to do is to step outside your comfort zone a bit. Do something that's uncomfortable. Do whatever that may be. Whatever you feel a little fearful, do that and put your fears head on, in a sense. And then also surround yourself with positive people, other successful people. And to borrow even from the great Tony Robbins, who really say it's that proximity is power. I'll borrow his principle of proximity is power. So hanging out with people that are more successful than you, consuming content of people that are more successful than you are. Because then you'll work towards that and elevate yourself.
So you can maybe explain to our audience some people may not be that familiar with what exactly hypnosis is and what it does. How does it really help, actors or anybody shift their narrative or inner thinking?
Yeah, it works with the subconscious mind, the deep-seated inside your mind, and shifting your mindset. So it's working with that underlying program of getting that stripped out of the starving artist transforming it into your professional working actor who deserves success. And sometimes it could just be due by reprogramming, things and counteracting messages you received growing up, a message you received from your family. A lot of people, when they think hypnosis, they think of someone, swinging pocket watch X in the clock like a chicken. And while it may be entertaining to watch, it's much more deeper than that. So it's about rewiring your mindset. And one thing that you can do, which is kind of like a self-hypnosis technique, is the process of visualization. So visualize in your mind, or even use your imagination, per se. That's one of the powerful tools of hypnosis, tapping into imagination. So tap into your imagination. Go back to your childlike wonder when you had this little imagination. So imagine yourself doing this great thing that you're setting out to do, and run it through your mind as if it's already happening. And do this over and over again, because the brain does not know the difference between fiction and reality. So that's one thing you can do over and over again, whether it's you're an actor, whether you're a coach, whether you're a salesperson. Just visualize every interaction that you're about to do as happening in your favor. Now, it may not always do that all the time, work out in your favor, but you'll notice that there'll be shifts in your performance and changes.
What's one of the biggest myths about hypnosis you like to bust today?
You can't make anyone do anything against their will. So if someone is morally opposed to something, you can't make anything do as they normally would not do. It's not mind control. And also, you have to have consent. There's no way you can really hypnotize anybody against their will.
Can you maybe share a story of how you help an actor using hypnosis and NLP to overcome their limiting beliefs?
Just by power of visualization, stepping into your power a bit. So I used to consult with an acting studio where I would come in and, monthly and go on different acting trainings, but I would provide a mindset component of it. And there was this one client who's a client now. She was off camera, when you speak to her, she was had a very gravitas to her, like a tough but likable quality to her. But when she was acting, it was very meek and soft-spoken. The way she was coming across. So we helped her with our acting coach, and myself helped her tap into her power, in a sense. So it transformed her acting to where she became really almost herself. Because that's what really successful actors do. Is even though they're playing a character, they're still bringing in themselves into the role. So when she added the gravitas after a little bit of coaching, she went from not booking work at all to booking like 3 TV roles in the span of 2 years, which is a major achievement. Compared to 9 or 10 years of not booking anything prior to that. So it does work when you really step into the power of things. And it's like so even myself as an agent, when I was first starting out, like working and pitching people to film and TV projects, I was associating myself with, I am doing this. I am, booking people to film and TV role, even though it technically wasn't yet. But I was working with the principle of act as if it's happening. And next thing you know, 2 months into it, I booked 3 primetime TV roles in a week with 3 different clients. So it can happen.
That's amazing. Now you wrote a book, right?
Yes, it's called Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists.
Can you maybe share like one exercise or a technique from the book that can help shift people's mindsets?
I definitely kind of mentioned some of the stuff, which is like perceiving, transforming failure into feedback and not taking rejection personal. Another thing I would say is the idea of the happy file, which I mentioned in the book, a few different times. So here's the thing that you do. It's kind of like keeping a gratitude journal some way. So you keep an actual journal, and every day you write down 3 good things that happened to you. As an actor, maybe you got good feedback on a performance. Maybe somebody enjoyed watching you perform. You got good feedback from an acting coach. An audience member enjoyed your work. So you document all of that. And then when you're having those moments of self-doubt, pull out your happy file. And that'll remind you again of what it is you set out to do.
So what like resources, books, tools, or even apps like on people's phones do you recommend like actors or people that want to shift their mindset can use?
I would think definitely, look at Tony Robbins material, podcasts, other podcasts are out there. There's a ton of podcasts that are great. Tim Ferriss, this podcast here, listen to that, subscribe to that. So follow podcasts and report. Apps, I like Mind Valley that partially do that, but there's a whole host of other tools out there. And I would say explore different opportunities because certain things will resonate with some and not with others, but do something that resonates with you.
So what's one piece of advice you want every artist listening to this conversation to take away from our conversation today?
I would say you are enough. That would be the first thing. You are enough and you deserve to be here. And, step into your power and don't, be discouraged and really connect to why it is you become a performer, why it is you're set up to do what you're doing.
Albert, if somebody had a question from our conversation today or they're interested in working with you, what's the best way they can reach out to you?
So you can reach out to social media on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also go to my website, albertbramante.com, but feel free to reach out to me in any way possible. And I'd be happy to communicate.
Awesome. So do you have any other advice to maybe somebody who is new, either they've never done acting before, they're considering it, they're very excited about it. Do you have any tips for people like who are interested in getting into the acting industry?
Yeah, I would say take some classes, some acting classes. And then if you're really serious about it, to really go all in, but also understand that this is going to be a lifelong process. It's not a sprint. It's going to be a process that's going to take years.
Albert, do you have any final words you'd like to say before we wrap up our conversation for today?
I first just want to thank you for inviting me on here, and I really had a good time. And I would just say, again, remember that you are enough.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It was definitely a very interesting conversation. I find you to be a really fascinating person. I mean, most people that I've met in psychology, they're more it's like the clinical type where it's all the work at the office and working with patients. You kind of combined a very creative industry. So you kind of combine multiple industries, which is really fascinating and really interesting. You're a very interesting person to talk to. And I think it's wonderful that you blend the two together, because I think a lot of people, not just, creatives, need to shift their mindset to something more positive, because especially like today's world, things are more stressful than ever.
They sure are. Absolutely.
So thank you again so much for coming on the show and sharing all your wisdom and experience with us and our audience. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me, Daniel.